Arabica stands as the undisputed protagonist of the global coffee market, commanding roughly 70% of the world's total production. This coffee traces its ultimate origin to the primeval forests of Ethiopia. Legend dictates that a goatherd named Koldi observed his flock exhibiting abnormal euphoria and restless energy after consuming these bright red fruits. Spurred by curiosity, the herder chewed the cherries himself, subsequently presenting these botanical specimens to the monks of a nearby monastery. However, the monks initially rejected the strange fruit, casting the cherries into the fire as an unknown temptation. Yet, as the seeds roasted within the flames, they released a potent, arresting aroma that drew the monks back to the hearth. Raking the charred seeds from the dying embers, they crushed the fragments and dissolved them in hot water, coalescing into the world's very first cup of coffee. Through this accidental pyrolysis, coffee initiated its slow, inexorable march into the theater of human civilization. It thrives exclusively in high-altitude environments above 1,000 meters, where dramatic shifts between blazing hot days and freezing cold nights force the cherries to mature at a crawl, slowly incubating complex flavor profiles of delicate florals, crisp fruit acidity, and rich chocolate. Yet, while humanity is utterly obsessed with its shape, shifting flavors, evolutionary biology reveals that this massive empire owes its existence to a rare, noble genomic accident. Arabica is the only tetraploid species within the coffee genus. It possesses 44 chromosomes, exactly double the genetic material of its wild relatives. This complex cellular architecture turns its beans into a hyper-concentrated vault of natural sucrose and rich, free lipids. When subjected to the roaring heat of a roaster, these dense carbohydrates undergo incredibly intricate Maillard reactions and deep caramelization, unleashing over 800 volatile aromatic hydrocarbons. This magnificent biochemical foundation is what allows Arabica to develop the elegant, refined acidity of citrus, jasmine, or fine wine. However, this extreme evolutionary sophistication comes paired with a fatal physiological defect. By dedicating nearly all of its biochemical energy to synthesizing these exquisite aromatic compounds, Arabica left its own physical defenses completely starved. Its internal caffeine concentration is suppressed to a mere 1.2%, less than half of what is found in rugged varieties like Robusta. Consequently, it stripped itself of the primary chemical weapon required to paralyze and kill tropical insects. It possesses virtually zero natural immunity to devastating plagues like coffee leaf rust, meaning it can only survive in fragile, high-altitude alpine zones above 900 meters. This delicate, high-maintenance constitution transformed Arabica's global expansion from a simple farming venture into a high-stakes geopolitical gamble fueled by imperial espionage, religious smuggling, and human blood. Before the dawn of the 17th century, the Islamic world held a ruthless, airtight monopoly on the global coffee trade through a single geographic choke point, the heavily guarded port of Mocha in Yemen. Recognizing that this dark, intoxicating fluid possessed an unprecedented power to stimulate and command the human nervous system, rulers classified live coffee plants as absolute state contraband. Every single coffee bean leaving the harbor was subjected to mandatory boiling or roasting to permanently kill its embryo, ensuring that not a single viable seed could ever take root on European soil. But as the age of sail advanced, international espionage shattered this botanical iron curtain. In 1670, an Indian Sufi monk named Baba Budan embarked on a pilgrimage to Mecca. Risking the terrifying penalty of public execution, he managed to conceal 7 live, fertile coffee seeds by strapping them directly to his stomach, successfully smuggling them out of the empire. Those 7 seeds took root in the mountains of Mysore, delivering the first catastrophic blow to Yemen's centuries-old monopoly. However, the definitive pivot that crowned Arabica as the king of global commodities was a near-insane act of naval devotion. In 1723, a French naval officer named Gabriel Declus managed to steal a single, prized Arabica seedling from the Royal Botanical Garden in Paris. A rare specimen originally gifted to the king by the Dutch, and boarded a vessel destined for the Caribbean island of Martinique. The transatlantic voyage was an absolute nightmare. The ship was intercepted by ruthless pirates, battered by violent Atlantic storms, and during a fierce naval engagement, the ship's freshwater evaporator was completely shattered, with the crew's water rations slashed to the bare minimum required to avoid death. Declus made an extraordinary historical gamble. He chose to endure the agonizing torture of dehydration, volunteering half of his daily life-saving water ration to keep the fragile, dying seedling alive. This lone plant, sustained by the sweat and cracked blood of a desperate officer, survived the crossing and multiplied rapidly upon arrival. Within the next century, the cloned descendants of Declus' seedling swept across Latin America like a biological tsunami. Today, over 90% of the traditional Arabica trees, spanning the Western Hemisphere, share an identical genetic lineage, tracing directly back to that single seedling kept alive on a sun-baked wooden deck. Yet, behind the romanticized mythology of Declus' voyage lies the cold, calculating commodity logic of Western capitalism. When Arabica's fragile but high, yielding genetics collided with the hyper-fertile, volcanic soils of Brazil, the entire nation was instantly hijacked by the machinery of globalized capital, because Arabica fruits ripen unevenly and require meticulous, individual hand sorting to preserve their delicate flavor profiles. Its cultivation completely resisted early forms of crude industrial mechanization. This pathological, insatiable demand for intensive human labor became the primary economic engine that sustained the horrific Atlantic slave trade late into the 19th century. Millions of African souls were systematically worked to death in the mountain ranges of Brazil, their lives converted into raw labor capital, merely to fuel the industrializing societies of Europe and North America with a refined, aromatic afternoon luxury. By the turn of the 20th century, the sheer volume of coffee production entirely dictated the geopolitical destiny of Brazil, spawning a ruthless political era known as coffee tom light, or coffee with milk politics. This was a cold, calculated alliance forged between the powerhouse coffee oligarchs of São Paulo and the billionaire dairy barons of Minas Gerais. Through systematic electoral manipulation, currency devaluations, and armed intimidation, these agricultural cartels took turns placing their chosen puppets onto the presidential throne. The entire financial apparatus and national treasury of the Brazilian state were converted into a private insurance pool, used exclusively to manipulate international markets and artificially stabilize coffee futures. The country had built a house of cards on a single plant. Whenever a massive polar frost decimated the delicate Arabica crops, or an overproduction crisis caused international commodity markets to collapse, the entire Brazilian economy would instantly suffer a catastrophic domino-style implosion, directly triggering massive military coups, financial ruins, and brutal dictatorial crises. Human civilization spent centuries engaging in high-stakes maritime smuggling, bleeding out on far-flung naval vessels, and sacrificing the lives of millions of enslaved laborers, all to systematically spread a single, fragile plant with 44 chromosomes to every corner of the earth. We comfort ourselves with the delusion that our refined, sophisticated tastes tamed this wild African shrub. In truth, it was this tiny, volatile seed of desire that permanently rewired the social classes, the economic empires, and the very lifeblood of the modern Americas. If Arabica is the delicate, pampered princess of the coffee world, then Robusta is its battle-hardened warrior, thriving effortlessly in low-altitude regions where the heat is relentless. This resilient crop laughs off the destructive pests and harsh climates that would easily wipe out entire Arabica plantations, delivering an incredibly stable, high-volume harvest in the grand evolutionary matrix of the Coffea genus. Robusta has never sought to please human palates with delicate floral aromas. As a diploid plant carrying just 22 chromosomes, it has spent millennia in the brutal lowlands, forging an ironclad chemical defense mechanism. Its internal caffeine concentration peaks at a staggering 2.2% to 4.0%, nearly double that of Arabica. This massive chemical payload, paired with exceptionally high levels of chlorogenic acid, CGA, did not evolve for our morning productivity. It is a lethal, natural pesticide designed to paralyze attacking insects and render the plant 100% immune to the catastrophic coffee leaf rust, Himalaya vastatrix. While this biochemical spiked armor brings a coarse, heavy earthiness and a bitter punch reminiscent of burning rubber, it grants Robusta an unrivaled physical advantage in industrial processing, an incredibly high concentration of soluble solids. Under the high temperature, high-pressure extraction of modern machinery, its insoluble lipids emulsify with extreme ease, generating a thick, golden, brown creamy layer several times denser than anything Arabica can muster. This unique composition transforms the rugged bean into the indispensable biochemical foundation of modern commercial instant coffee and heavy Italian espresso blends. Today, we assume the British are inherently a nation of tea drinkers. Yet, in the mid-19th century, the British Empire was actually a fanatical coffee kingdom, and its crown colony of Ceylon was the largest Arabica producer on earth. This came to a grinding halt in 1869, when one of the most catastrophic ecological disasters in agricultural history struck. The coffee leaf rust fungus swept across the island with terrifying speed, completely obliterating Ceylon's vast Arabica estates within 20 years and causing production to collapse by 92%. This ecological ruin abruptly severed the British Empire's coffee arteries, forcing an entire society to pivot toward black tea cultivated in India and China, permanently rewriting the cultural fabric of British life. Just as the global coffee industry faced total, suffocating collapse, geopolitical explorers, deep in the wild jungles of the Congo Basin, made an extraordinary discovery. They found a completely new coffee species used by local indigenous communities, which they aptly named Robusta for its sheer toughness. This plant was entirely unfazed by the fungal plague that had choked out Arabica, demonstrating an ability to bear fruit aggressively, even in 40 degrees Celsius heat and waterlogged lowland clays. British and French colonizers immediately seized upon this Iron Man crop, packaging and shipping it to their colonies across West Africa and Southeast Asia. Robusta's dramatic entry tore a path through the fungal blockade, single-handedly rescuing the world's failing supply of liquid alertness. During the global conflict of World War II, this intense, unyielding energy source would become the ultimate survival asset for frontline soldiers who relied heavily on its concentrated caffeine to endure the trauma of the trenches. While Robusta kept the embers of the coffee trade burning in the 19th century, its true explosion at the end of the 20th century executed a profound re-engineering of global geoeconomics. Following the end of the Cold War, a war-torn Vietnamese government, facing a critical shortage of foreign currency, launched its sweeping economic reform program, known as DTMIT. The state desperately required a strategic agricultural weapon, capable of rapid monetization. On the global stage, they cast their eyes toward the Central Highlands, a region of fertile, humid, and intensely hot volcanic red soil where delicate Arabica would instantly perish, but where Robusta found its absolute paradise. The state orchestrated the migration of millions of citizens into these red lands, igniting a literal black leap forward in agricultural history. Backed by an astronomical fruiting rate, virtually zero harvesting overhead, and an absence of need for meticulous maintenance or expensive pesticides, Vietnam's coffee output surged 20-fold in a single decade, catapulting the nation onto the throne as the world's second-largest coffee exporter. This ultra-cheap black tsunami, surging out of Southeast Asia, triggered a catastrophic collapse of the global coffee futures market at the turn of the century. Overnight, international prices plummeted to historic lows, pushing high cost, hand-harvested Arabica estates in Colombia and Central America to the brink of ruin, forcing countless Latin American farmers into bankruptcy and exile. This exact geopolitical ambush pulled Vietnam's own economy back from a lethal precipice during a volatile International Monetary Fund (IMF) restructuring period, anchoring its national survival purely on the massive export value of a single cash crop. From a Congolese jungle savior rescuing an empire from its tea crisis, to a price tsunami on Vietnamese, soil-crushing Latin American monopolies, Robusta used its weaponized 22 chromosomes to permanently strip coffee of its aristocratic pretense. Through unmatched affordability and raw, relentless yield, it democratized caffeine. It transformed a luxury beverage into a cold, hyper-efficient microchip of time, harvesting, seamlessly hardwired into every factory assembly line and corporate cubicle across the modern world. Vietnamese drip coffee stands as a striking testament to the unexpected fusion of Eastern and Western culinary traditions. When French colonists introduced coffee to Vietnam in the 19th century, they ran into an immediate logistical hurdle. The brutal tropical humidity made fresh dairy spoil almost instantly. To circumvent this, locals executed a bold strategy that permanently shifted the global fluid map. They completely abandoned expensive, highly perishable fresh milk, replacing it with high-sugar, high-fat condensed milk. On a molecular level, the highly concentrated casein micelles and milk fat globules in condensed milk function as a powerful physical blanket. They perfectly wrap and seal the harsh, throat-scorching polyphenols inherent to the Robusta bean, while the high-density sugars trigger the brain's immediate reward pathways. This precise biochemical collision transforms what was originally an unpalatable botanical pesticide into a dominant super-energy bomb laced with deep notes of chocolate and heavy caramel. Through raw human ingenuity, an environmental toxin was tamed once again, creating a bittersweet masterpiece that remains the most captivating fixture of Saigon street culture. A drink reflecting a nation defined by raw resilience and a uniquely complex, hybrid charm. Every cheap instant coffee or commercial blend consumed across the world today bears the invisible scars of how Vietnamese Robusta radically re-engineered global geoeconomics. Vietnam originally possessed no native coffee culture. In the late 19th century, French imperialists sought a weapon to break Latin America's absolute monopoly on the global market. They recognized a perfect breeding ground in the fertile volcanic red soils and suffocating, low-altitude heat of Vietnam's central highlands, forcibly introducing the hyper-hardy, low-maintenance Robusta crop. To unlock the absolute deepest reserves of Robusta's biochemical energy, locals relied on a physical tool that runs completely counter to modern industrial efficiency: the traditional Vietnamese fin filter. Operating without the assistance of high-pressure steam, it relies entirely on the primal physics of gravity and microporous convection. Because it eschews paper filters entirely, the bean's insoluble diterpene oils, the very compounds responsible for delivering a heavy, rich mouthfeel, pass through with zero material loss, outfitted with microscopic sediment particles. The liquid undergoes a slow, insulated 8 to 10 minute saturation and extraction cycle. The resulting elixir boasts a molecular concentration and caffeine density that leaves standard Western drip coffee completely in the dust. During the brutal, resource-starved years of mid-century warfare, colonial blockades completely cut off the supply of both fresh and condensed milk to domestic markets. In the heart of Hanoi, Nguyen Van Giang, the legendary founder of Cafe Gin, weaponized local survival instinct to engineer the ultimate fluid variant. He substituted dairy with raw egg yolks. By whipping the yolk at high speeds with a fraction of sugar, he constructed a thick, high-calorie, amino acid. Dense custard blanket. Only a flavor profile as coarse, unyielding, and aggressively concentrated as Vietnamese, Robusta possessed the molecular muscle to slice straight through the dense animal fat barrier of the egg yolk. It neutralized any trace of gaminess, revealing an otherworldly, magical mouthfeel reminiscent of liquid tiramisu. From improvised egg yolks whisked in wartime trenches to the devastating economic price, tsunami launched from the volcanic red soils of the Central Highlands. Vietnamese drip coffee used the cheapest, most disdained genetics in the botanical kingdom to rewrite the rules of consumption. Through the calculated realignment of gravity and lipids, it forged a dark fluid mythology, born of the Third World, a liquid empire that survived colonial exploitation, mounted a fierce economic counteroffensive, and ultimately consumed the taste discourse of the Western middle class. Liberica accounts for barely 1% of the modern global market today. But its evolutionary path is a narrative of sheer, brute force survival in the evolutionary arms race of the plant kingdom. Most coffee species chose to dwarf their physical stature, channeling their limited nutrients into high fruit yields. But Liberica, originating from the wild west coast of Africa, chose a completely opposite, heavy-handed evolutionary trajectory. It weaponized its physiology to become the incredible Hulk of the coffee family. Intriguingly, its internal caffeine concentration is even lower than that of the delicate Arabica, meaning it entirely abandoned the biochemical strategy of using high-potency toxins as a natural pesticide. Instead, it threw its weight into absolute physical defense. Its towering 20-meter canopy deters the vast majority of ground-level pests, while its exceptionally thick, iron-hard woody endocarp creates a formidable physical lockdown, leaving destructive stem borers completely powerless against its dense, oversized beans. This unique physiology yields a distinct chemical byproduct. Liberica's cells accumulate an astonishingly high concentration of fructose and sucrose. Consequently, while a dark roast lacks the sharp, immediate sting of heavy caffeine, the intense heat triggers a highly concentrated flavor profile. A striking, surreal collision of tropical jackfruit and rich, smoked wood notes. In the late 19th century, the physical singularity of this giant crop completely rewrote the geopolitical map of global coffee. Liberica's leap from West Africa onto the global stage was a high-stakes imperial experiment, born of a fungal plague and aggressive colonial expansion. In 1890, a devastating wave of coffee leaf rust swept the planet, effectively obliterating nearly every traditional Arabica estate across Latin America and Asia. Overnight, an American market deeply addicted to caffeine faced an unprecedented, catastrophic raw material shortage. The government in Washington desperately required an alternative species, one that was 100% immune to the rust plague and completely free from the leverage of South American coffee oligarchs. The historical turning point arrived with the outbreak of the Spanish-American War in 1898. Defeating Spain, the United States forcibly annexed the Philippines as its overseas colony. In the volcanic ash soils of Batangas province, American agricultural experts discovered a revelation shielded by its natural physical immunity to leaf rust. The giant Liberica trees were growing at a terrifyingly aggressive rate. With a massive influx of official capital from Washington, the Philippines launched into a frenzied, full-scale Liberica production. Boom, known locally as Kapong Barako. These dense beans were integrated into the core logistics of the U.S. military as a primary wartime ration, flooded into the North American mainland to plug the massive Arabica deficit. Propelled by a relentless stream of American dollars, the Philippines skyrocketed within a few short years to become the fifth largest coffee-producing nation on Earth. This was Liberica's golden era, the closest it ever came to dominating the neural pathways of mankind. Yet, the exact geopolitical machinery that built its crown would ultimately orchestrate its execution. Because Liberica had been thrust onto the global throne purely as a political placeholder, It was fated to be the first asset sacrificed when the political winds shifted. At the dawn of the 20th century, Philippine national consciousness surged into a full awakening. Local resistance movements began aggressively charting a path away from American colonial rule, igniting protracted political frictions with Washington. For American capitalists, a logistical outpost that refused to remain compliant instantly lost its economic justification for protection. To suppress and penalize the Philippine drive for independence, the U.S. government unleashed a ruthless display of geoeconomic formatting. Through aggressive tariff barriers, severe export quotas, and an absolute blockade of transnational shipping lines, Washington cut off the lifeblood of Philippine Liberica from the American mainland and mainstream Western markets overnight. Global capital pivoted immediately, returning to heavily subsidized, compliant Arabica plantations across Brazil and Central America. This cold political strangulation executed a devastating physical liquidation of the global Liberica industry. Stripped of its sole export market, the vast Liberica estates of the Philippines collapsed into bankruptcy and abandonment within a matter of years. The giant bean was completely and mercilessly erased from the ledger of global commodities trade, never to recover. Today, Liberica's global market share has been crushed to less than 1%, completely exiled into a boutique, niche historical relic, confined to the domestic markets of Malaysia and the Philippines. That thick, syrupy dark fluid, with its haunting notes of jackfruit and wood smoke, is no longer a strategic imperial asset. It stands as a silent botanical tombstone, deep in the tropical rainforest, a quiet testament to how easily a plant can be crushed and erased by the colossal wheels of transnational capital and geopolitical warfare. Jamaica Blue Mountain coffee stands as a legendary national treasure, celebrated globally for an incredibly clean flavor profile almost entirely devoid of bitterness, an impeccable harmony of acidity, sweetness, and body. Yet, on the cold canvas of plant physiology, this legendary taste is not a random gift of nature. It is a precise, human, exploited blockade of a plant, photosynthesis, using extreme topography and climate. Authentic Blue Mountain coffee is strictly confined by the Jamaica Agricultural Commodities Regulatory Authority, JACRA, to a narrow, legally designated appellation between 910 and 1,700 meters above sea level. The true biochemical engine of this terroir is the topographic mist interception effect. As highly humid Caribbean sea breezes collide with the sheer cliffs of the Blue Mountains, the air is forced upward and rapidly cooled, weaving a perpetual physical barrier of dense fog directly over the plantations. This thick cloud cover actively diffuses direct ultraviolet radiation, forcibly suppressing the photosynthetic efficiency of the coffee trees. While ordinary coffee cherries require a mere 5 to 6 months to mature, the ultra, low solar radiation, and chilly, high-altitude environment of the Blue Mountains drag the maturation cycle out to an astonishing 9 to 10 months. This grueling, prolonged cycle grants the tree double the time to steadily pump trace minerals extracted from the porous volcanic soil straight into the core of the seed. Stripped of the sharp, volatile acidity that plagues low-altitude crops due to accelerated growth, Blue Mountain coffee develops an incredibly smooth mouthfeel, an unparalleled internal equilibrium, and its signature, velvet, soft, herbal sweetness. The ascension of Blue Mountain coffee from a regional harvest to the most expensive, enigmatic luxury totem of the 20th century was never driven by flavor alone. Behind its meteoric rise lies a cold undercurrent of Western colonial legacies and a predatory geoeconomic encirclement of post-war Japanese capital. As early as the 18th century, the British Empire transformed the Blue Mountains into its primary Caribbean coffee supply hub, establishing an industrial anomaly that remains a hallmark of the trade today. Packaging green export beans inside exclusive wooden barrels rather than traditional burlap sacks, originally used by the Royal Navy to transport rum and flour. These barrels inadvertently functioned as an exquisite physical shield, insulating the delicate green beans from the corrosive humidity of long ocean voyages. However, the definitive pivot that weaponized its sky. High pricing occurred in 1951. Super Hurricane Charlie laid absolute waste to Jamaica. Its coffee infrastructure. Paired with the country's subsequent independence from Britain, the entire Blue Mountain region fell into a deep economic vacuum. Sensing a rare geopolitical opportunity, surging Japanese coffee conglomerates stepped into the void. The rapidly expanding post-war Japanese middle class was deeply starved for Western lifestyle signifiers, eagerly seeking objects of fanatical imitation. By injecting immense reconstruction capital into the island, Japanese enterprises systematically monopolized an astonishing 85 to 90% of the absolute export quota of Blue Mountain coffee for decades. Through masterful starvation marketing and orchestrated media blitzes, Japanese corporate capital successfully wove the name Blue Mountain into the ultimate consumer matrix of status, prestige, and old money identity across East Asia. In an era defined by severe information asymmetry, the blind worship of this single being was, in reality, a brilliant game of artificial scarcity engineered by transnational syndicates. Caught in the crosshairs of modern plant genetics and the radical waves of specialty coffee culture, contemporary Blue Mountain coffee faces a profound crisis known as the Typica genetic paradox. The nobility of Blue Mountain coffee stems from its stubborn preservation of Typica, the oldest, most unadulterated heirloom lineage of the Arabica species. While this variety delivers an exceptionally delicate and clean profile, its genetic makeup is notoriously fragile, offering virtually zero defense against coffee leaf rust or the destructive ravages of the coffee berry borer. For generations, Jamaica relied on absolute geographic isolation and the quasi-military legal authority of JACRA to strictly ban high-yielding hybrid cultivars from entering the mountain range, fiercely guarding this biological island. Yet, this protective shell ultimately became a gilded cage, completely stalling the crop's flavor evolution. With the explosion of the third-wave specialty coffee movement in the 21st century, the global power matrix of flavor underwent a violent, decentralized restructuring. The geisha variety, unlocked from the ancient genetic vaults of Ethiopia and cultivated to perfection in the microclimates of Panama, burst onto the scene, armed with an aggressive explosion of citrus and jasmine aromatics, and supercharged by sophisticated modern fermentation techniques. Geisha effortlessly stripped Blue Mountain of its half-century-old title as the king of flavor. Under the strict, objective metrics of modern specialty coffee association, SCA cupping protocols, the traditional Blue Mountain profile, once revered for its extreme balance and moderation, is frequently criticized by modern coffee geeks as lacking character. From a botanical miracle forged beneath Caribbean fog to the Royal Navy's recycled rum barrels, from the symbolic harvest of East Asia's bubble economy to the fracturing of an absolute monarchy on the modern specialty stage, the name Blue Mountain stretches far beyond mere geography. It is a living geoeconomic fossil, preserved inside a sealed wooden barrel, silently charting how human capital can package a plant struggle for survival into an entry ticket for high society, and how seamlessly the evolving aesthetics of luxury can dismiss a totem of the old world into the quiet shadows of history. For millions of specialty coffee enthusiasts, Ethiopian Yirgacheffe is the definitive gateway bean, the single origin that completely shatters the deeply ingrained stereotype that coffee is nothing more than a bitter, heavy fluid. Across the history of global coffee propagation, plantations in Latin America or Asia, no matter how much they boast a pedigree, can only trace their genetic lineage back to a few highly uniform cloned seedlings, smuggled out by colonists during the Age of Sail. This extreme genetic bottleneck permanently locked in the disease resistance and flavor ceiling of commercial coffee worldwide But Ethiopian Yirgacheffe stands as the undisputed Noah's archegenomic sovereign of caffeine civilization. Here, the beans classified simply as heirloom varieties are, in reality, a chaotic, simmering melting pot of thousands of wild mutations that have yet to be fully named, mapped, or sequenced by modern botany. Yirgacheffe was originally just a high-altitude microregion within the broader Sidamo province. The pivotal shift occurred in 1972 with the introduction of Ethiopia as first wet processing station. Traditional natural processing introduces heavy earth and fermented flavors that mask the delicate, ethereal essence of the native varieties. In contrast, the wet process leverages pectinase enzymes to efficiently strip away the fruit pulp, unlocking concentrated reserves of natural tannins and monoterpene compounds within Yirgacheffe. Catalyzed by the roaster as flames, compounds like linalool and geranio flawlessly mimic a highly sophisticated aromatic ester spectrum of fresh jasmine blossoms, crisp lemon, and black tea. It completely inverted humanity, as historical understanding of coffee as a sick, charred stimulant, single-handedly launching the modern specialty coffee movement, as obsession with citric acid. Behind this miraculous cup of jasmine aromatics stands the most unyielding sovereign bastion in the modern history of African geopolitics. During the brutal late 19th century scramble for Africa, the land ecosystems of Latin America, Asia, and West Africa were systematically plowed under by Western bayonets, replaced by mass monoculture plantations, ruled by slaves and overseers designed to extract transnational windfalls. Ethiopia alone completely shattered Italian colonial ambitions at the legendary Battle of Adwa in 1896, standing proud as the only nation on the African continent to preserve its absolute independence. This geopolitical miracle directly insulated Yirgacheffe's deep biodiversity from corporate eradication. Free from the violent imposition of colonial capital, local cultivation completely bypassed the cruel logic of the Western slave estate system, stubbornly maintaining its ancient traditions of garden coffee and forest toffee. Yirgacheffe is not an industrial product calculated by corporate agronomists in a glass tower. It is a genomic miracle, meticulously selected berry by hundreds of thousands of non-compliant Ethiopian smallholders within their own native backyards and wild forests. A single seed, carrying an unyielding lineage of sovereignty, mounted a quiet resistance against modern industrial civilization, as relentless conquest of the natural world. As history crossed into the 21st century, this uncolonized, sovereign land faced a joint encirclement and alienation engineered by modern financial algorithms and Western specialty coffee semiotics. In Lautelimba, seeking to insulate local farmers from the aggressive price slashing of global middlemen and combat severe domestic famine, the Ethiopian government established the Ethiopia Commodity Exchange, ECX. This was a masterclass in macroeconomic engineering. All coffee crops were legally mandated to enter unified state warehouses for anonymous, standardized auction. Overnight, this act wiped out the highly prized traceability of individual microjan lots for the capital engine of third-wave specialty coffee, which operates entirely on the pedigree of geographic terroir. This was an existential catastrophe. Western buyers could not tolerate their supreme intellectual property, Yirgacheffe, being reduced to a cold, sterile commodity ticker like Weaponizing immense geopolitical capital levers, they waged a frantic, relentless campaign against the ECX's algorithmic Iron Curtain, eventually forcing the Ethiopian state to unbind microgen lot, tracking to satisfy the luxury specialty market. Yet, the ultimate absurdity of this encirclement reached its peak within the taste alienation of the transnational middle class. Today, global elites willingly shell out astronomical premiums for a cup of top-gen-tier Yirgacheffe, using a core grading metric that borders on the bizarre, its Tijan-like body. The thinner, cleaner, and more reminiscent of a delicate lemon-black tea the liquid behaves, the higher its score climbs. This stands as a crowning irony of commercial aesthetics. Humanity spent 500 years deploying geopolitical espionage, heavy steam machinery, and intense 9 bar pressure pumps just to reformat coffee into a hyper-Zen concentrated, oily, viscous, industrial neural fuel. Yet, at the absolute apex of modern taste refinement, the contemporary elite spends fortunes merely to hunt for a phantom trace of elegant, transparent tea perfume within a coffee cup. From the thousands of unmapped, wild genomes sprawling through the Great Rift Valley, to the native gardens defended by the black powder of Adwa, to the symbolic chess match played across modern commodity floors, your gas chef uses its rebellious jasmine profile to state a profound truth. True luxury is never the high-zen tech output of an industrial assembly line, but the untamed, primordial divinity that somehow managed to survive unconquered through the gears of transnational capital and the meat and grinder of history. Kopi Luwak, or civet coffee, stands as arguably the most legendary, bizarre, and deeply controversial liquid in the entire history of global consumption. Human fascination with this drink is anchored in a striking biological irony. In the evolutionary warfare of plant defense, the bitterness and astringency of a coffee bean serve as a potent chemical weapon. Built from complex protein, caffeine complexes, and dense tannins, specifically engineered to prevent mammals from chewing and swallowing them. Yet, nature's most effective biochemical antidote to this defense mechanism happens to be hidden deep inside the stomach of a small, nocturnal jungle predator. The Asian palm civet, native to the Indonesian archipelago, possesses a digestive tract that functions as a near flawless microscopic bioreactor. While the animal's stomach cannot dissolve the stone, hard, protective internal endocarp of the coffee cherry, its endogenous proteolytic enzymes easily penetrate the micro pores of the bean's surface. This process precisely degrades large, molecule proteins into short chain peptides and free amino acids, a critical enzymatic hydrolysis that systematically strips away the core molecular foundations that produce charred bitterness during subsequent roasting. Concurrently, the oxygen-deprived environment of the civet gut sparks an intense lactic acid fermentation, causing generated short-chain fatty acids, CKs to micro, emulsify with the lipids trapped inside the bean structure. By the time these seeds are completely excreted, their internal biochemistry has been radically re-engineered. The aggressive bitter acids collapse, replaced by an incredibly smooth, low bitterness profile, defined by striking musk notes and a velvety, rounded mouthfeel that once drove European aristocrats into an absolute frenzy. Modern consumerism slickly markets civet coffee as the ultimate signifier of high society taste and luxury status. Yet, at its geographic source, every single bubble in this fluid is permanently stained with the blood and sweat of imperial slavery. In 1830, the Dutch colonial administration implemented the notorious cultivation system. Cultures still sell across Java and Sumatra. To extract maximum commercial windfalls, colonial forces violently seized the native populations, rice paddies, forcibly transforming the landscape into vast Arabica coffee monopolies. To prevent a single cent of wealth leakage, the Dutch enforced a draconian decree. Local native laborers and indentured slaves were strictly forbidden from harvesting, roasting, or even touching a single berry on the trees for their own consumption, enduring over a dozen hours of crushing daily labor, consumed by hunger, exhaustion, and a desperate craving for caffeine. This subaltern proletariat found themselves pushed to the absolute edge of survival. They soon noticed that wild civets would slip into the estates under the cover of night, consume the finest cherries, and pass the undigested seeds whole. Driven by a complete absence of alternatives and the terror of colonial lashes, Chinese laborers and native farmers began scouring the midnight jungle floors, tracking animal feces to recover the discarded gold. They smuggled these defiled beans back to their quarters, washing them repeatedly in mountain streams, hulling them by hand, and roasting them over makeshift iron pans. This liquid, conceived entirely as a slave, as substitute, to endure the whip of the colonizer, became the only mental solace in a dark, exploited existence. However, the ultimate historical irony was executed by capital itself. Dutch plantation owners eventually intercepted the slaves' midnight secret. Upon sampling this makeshift brew, the colonizers were utterly stunned by the surreal smoothness brought about by the animal natural enzymatic hydrolysis. Rather than punishing the workers, the colonial apparatus deployed immediate military force to hijack this survival defensive line. Reverse, packaging animal waste into an ultra-premium luxury commodity exclusively reserved for European royalty and high-net worth aristocrats. As history crossed into the 21st century, global consumerism pushed this historical absurdity into an even deeper circle of hell. To satisfy the modern elite's fanatical chase for kopi luwak as a badge of class distinction, the original romantic myth of wild jungle foraging was systematically dismantled by the laws of scale. Driven by astronomical profit margins, the modern market birthed the horror of industrial-intensive battery farming. Thousands of wild civets are systematically poached from their jungle habitats and padlocked inside cramped, filthy iron cages. To maximize yield, predatory operators completely strip away the animal's evolutionary omnivorous instincts. To forage for meat and fruits, force-feeding them an unnatural, relentless diet of overloaded, frequently rotting coffee cherries day after day. Deprived of their territory, these wild creatures suffer from severe malnutrition, systemic digestive ulcers, and catastrophic psychological collapse, manifesting as zoochosis, where they pace and self-mutilate frantically inside their wire prisons until they perish. From the blood-soaked survival lines of 19th century Indonesian migrants to the desperate whimpers inside 21st century wire cages, civet coffee has never been an exotic miracle of nature. It is a grim, uncompromising ledger of human greed and class exploitation, wrapped in a sweet sugar coat of biochemical novelty. A dark fluid that serves as a monument to how mercilessly capital can extract luxury from suffering. White coffee carries distinct definitions across various regions, but in Ipoh, Malaysia, it denotes a specialized beverage crafted from a lighter roasting method and typically paired with condensed milk or creamer. The nomenclature does not imply that the coffee beans themselves are physically white. Rather, it stands in stark opposition to the deeper, heavier traditional roasts of the region. Ipoh white coffee encapsulates the rich history of Nanyang coffee shops, intimately intertwined with migration, tin mining hubs, and local breakfast culture. While its sweet, highly aromatic profile, traditionally paired with kaya toast and soft-boiled eggs, may not align with the standard cupping nomenclature of Western specialty coffee. It serves as an authentic record of how a locality successfully adapted an exotic crop into a comforting everyday staple. Within the dimensions of food, physical chemistry, and roasting science, the white in white coffee signifies neither a genetic mutation of the bean nor the literal color of the liquid matrix. Instead, it stems from an ancient Chinese semantic metaphor meaning pure and unadulterated. As a coffee processing methodology unique to Southeast Asia, its core mechanics rely on the precise regulation of low-temperature pyrolysis to achieve extreme cost control and an intensely concentrated profile. Traditional Nanyang black coffee typically subjects low-grade Robusta or Arabica beans to high-temperature heavy roasting alongside granulated sugar and wheat until the carbohydrates are entirely carbonized. This violent process introduces an exceptionally harsh, throat-scorching bitterness and heavy tar-like impurities. White coffee completely reconstructs this chemical formula, It drastically depresses the roasting temperature, introducing only vegetable lipids during the process to serve as a protective thermal shield. Absent the high temperature, caramelization, and carbonization reactions of added sugars, the internal sugars and free amino acids within the coffee beans undergo only a moderate Maillard reaction. This not only blocks the synthesis of highly carcinogenic polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, but also flawlessly preserves the bean's native caffeine, abundance, and trace organic acids. When these lightly roasted beans are ground and combined with condensed and evaporated milk, the vigorous stirring triggers a powerful, atypical emulsification between the natural coffee lipids and milk fats, culminating in a dense, ultra-silky, pale yellow, suspended colloid, completely devoid of charred bitterness. The white coffee that heavily dominates global supermarket shelves today was forged from a grim history of labor and the blood and tears of subaltern immigrants. A survival intelligence catalyzed by the late 19th century tin rush on the Malay Peninsula. At the time, Ipoh, Esquinta Valley in Malaysia stood as the undisputed global capital of tin investment. A massive influx of Western capital introduced rigid industrial assembly, line management, alongside the coffee-drinking habits of British colonizers. Hainanese immigrants surviving under British estate owners and trading houses monopolized chef and butler positions due to their exceptional linguistic and culinary talents. This positioned them as the first Asian cohort exposed to Western high-pressure and drip coffee. However, as Western coffee trickled down into the mass labor market, it triggered a violent rejection born of class realities. For Chinese laborers enduring extreme physical exertion in suffocating tropical mines, the Arabica drip coffee favored by the British was too thin, unpleasantly acidic, and devoid of the caloric density required to rapidly restore physical energy. Conversely, the crude local black coffee was so intensely scorched that it frequently triggered severe gastric distress on an empty stomach. To tame this colonially charged beverage, veteran Hainanese cooks on the streets of Ipoh engineered a taste matrix of moderate reform, blending the Western light roasting concept they observed in trading houses with the traditional Chinese culinary wisdom of using lipids to coat ingredients. They devised a rustic formula, slow roasting coffee beans with butter at low temperatures and blending the extract with high-sugar condensed milk. Yellowish liquid, simultaneously delivering a potent caffeine shock, a high-calorie lipid replenishment, and a gentle coating for the gastric mucosa, swiftly became the ultimate energy bar that sustained a generation of Chinese laborers through the high-intensity exploitation of the pitch-black mines, beginning in the 1980s, driven by global geoeconomic restructuring and the emergence of alternative materials. Ipoh suffered a catastrophic collapse in tin prices, permanently relegating its once booming mining industry to history. Yet, the white coffee that once served as raw fuel for miners executed a stunning capital counteroffensive through a post-colonial cultural backlash. As Malaysia forged its modern national identity, white coffee was endowed with symbolism stretching far beyond sustenance. The Malaysian government officially designated a national cultural heritage, elevating it to a liquid national treasure, representing multicultural fusion. Behind this elevation lies a highly successful commercial calculation by the transnational food industry, targeting human addictive instincts. The aesthetics of Western third-wave specialty coffee have long monopolized the discourse of global taste, worshipping the floral and fruit acidities of single microlots, while dismissing traditional Nanyang coffee laced with margarine, condensed milk, and non-dairy creamer as unrefined heresy. Yet, the industrialization of white coffee achieved absolute dominance by openly defying these middle-class taste barriers, by seamlessly fusing the low bitterness, low-temperature roast of white coffee with the modern food industry. S3 in one instantization, transnational capitalism successfully re-engineered this regional beverage into a hyper-consumer commodity for contemporary East Asian white-collar workers trapped in high-pressure routines. A packet of instant white coffee biochemically delivers a flawless formula of dopamine and caffeine collusion. Extreme affordability. The high calorie comfort of refined sugars and trans fats, paired with a jarring wake-up shock from Robusta beans containing double the caffeine of Arabica. From the survival fluid used by Quinta Valley miners a century ago to fend off tropical malaria and corporate exploitation, to the sweet, frothy fuel used in modern corporate cubicles to combat midnight KPIs, white coffee, with its pale golden beans and hardcore matrix of sucrose and lipids, proves a profound thesis in the narrative circulation of global commodities. What permanently rules the human tongue is never the refined taste constructed by old-world imperialism, but the industrial subaltern genes, evolved in the cracks of survival, engineered to offer the most direct solace to an exhausted body.